The Seahawks got off to a fast start at Sofi Stadium today. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. Getting vengeance for that week one loss, falling apart with penalties, a sputtering offense, and injuries. I'll be breaking down Seattle's second loss to the Rams this season on our latest postgame of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for tuning into this latest post-game podcast and listening to Locked On Seahawks 5 days a week. The Seahawks started off fast for the second time this year against the Rams, but unfortunately, the end result ended up being the same as well, losing 17-16, a game-winning field goal in the waning moments for the Rams. The Seahawks tried to kick their own game-winning field goal, and Jason Myers, unfortunately, was not able to make it work. I'm going to be breaking down everything that happened today at SoFi Stadium, including a number of key injuries for the Seahawks heading into a short week with a home matchup against the 49ers coming up. And we're going to be doing our 3 up, 3 down, our weekly game balls, and much more. So without further ado, let's get to it. The Seahawks coming into today were 6-3. They were tied for first place with the 49ers in the NFC West. Unfortunately, they now are potentially going to be the number 7 seed coming out of this week in the NFC. The Vikings and Broncos are currently playing. If the Vikings win that game, they will be ahead of the Seahawks in the standings for the wild card. So Seattle dropped several spots today with a loss to the Rams, and it's certainly a game that the Seahawks could look back at the end of the season and wonder what could have been, because this was a game like the first matchup between these two teams. The Seahawks got off to a quick start, scored a touchdown in their opening drive, had 13 points to open the game. And then after that, the offense sputtered, only 3 points in the second half. At least in this game, they had some injuries that you could look at as maybe a little bit of an excuse. Geno Smith banged his elbow early in the third quarter, had to exit, did return for the final drive in the game, but Drew Lock in the possessions he was in, the Seahawks couldn't move the ball at all. He threw an interception. They had a couple of 3-and-outs. And certainly it was a rough outing for him in his second game action for the Seahawks over the past 2 years. But really, bottom line is this has been an issue for the Seahawks team all year long. It hasn't mattered if Geno Smith's under center, if Drew Lock is under center. They have not been able to build off of fast starts. We saw it against the Cleveland Browns a few weeks ago, the Rams in week 1, now the Rams again in week 11. This is a team that cannot sustain offensively, and we've seen them sputter. You look at the stats, and Drew Lock was part of this, but Geno Smith also had a couple rough drives before he got injured. You look at the second half, they had 87 total yards of offense, 3 points, and most importantly, they were 1 for 8 on third down. And on the opening scoring drive that Geno Smith threw a touchdown to DK Metcalf, an 8-yard touchdown, the Seahawks went 3 for 3 on third down on that drive alone. They only converted 2 more third downs the entire rest of this football game. They had one other one in the first half. They were 4 for 7 in the first half. And then after that, everything unraveled. They couldn't sustain drives. They had the one turnover on a deep ball that Drew Lock tried to squeeze into Tyler Lockett, and it had no chance of being completed. Gets intercepted by Darian Kendrick. They pretty much abandoned running the football, but part of it is they didn't have enough plays to sustain any bit of a running game. And Ken Walker III got hurt early with what Pete Carroll said was a legit oblique injury. So that's worrisome anytime you hear that legit label. But the Seahawks were not able to run the football. They had under 70 rushing yards in this football game. And even though the defense played well, there were some mistakes on that side of the ball. They had 12 penalties, over 125 yards in penalties in this game, and most of that damage came on the defensive side of the football. The most notable ones late were in the fourth quarter. Reek Woolen got hit for a hands to the face, illegal face, hands to the face penalty that extended a drive. It would have been 4th and 15 on an incomplete pass there. The Rams probably have to punt there, and then the Seahawks have a chance to ice the game. Instead, they go down and they ended up getting the eventual game-winning field goal on that drive. There also was a penalty against Devin Witherspoon in the end zone on their previous drive that allowed them to eventually punch it in from a yard out with Darrell Henderson, and that was a questionable one. So this was a game where there were a lot of, as Quandre Diggs said, there were a lot of ticky-tack calls. and the Seahawks got a number of them called in the secondary, but that's the way this game was trending, and they didn't adjust to that. And those penalties, the lack of discipline ended up ultimately hurting the Seahawks in this game defensively. But the bottom line is, when you give up 17 points in a game in the NFL, in today's NFL, you should be able to win. The offense could not continue to move the football and put points on the board after that first touchdown. And this has been a consistent problem for this team. And you can point the finger at the quarterback if you'd like. You can point the finger at Shane Waldron. The scripted plays work, and you get away from that, and the offense can't get anything going. You can blame the injuries. Certainly in this game, you don't want to use injuries as an excuse, but that is one that you can look at. But anyway, slice it. The production from the offense in the second half against the Rams defense that has been okay at best most of the season, to make them look like world beaters in the second half, only scored 3 points. It was a disappointing effort from the offense, going 5 for 15 on a third down. That is just not going to cut it, especially when they started 3 for 3. So there's a lot of things the Seahawks have to improve upon, and they don't have much time to dwell on this game. And sometimes that can be a plus. They've got to get ready for the 49ers on a Thursday night. But now the focus is going to shift away from the end of the game when Geno Smith had an opportunity to lead the team down the field, and his mic goes out. There's a mic outage. They call a run. Jason Myers tries a 55-yard field goal, and it's wide right. They have to put all that drama at the end of the game aside, and they've got to shift their focus now with this other game coming up in less than 4 days. And this is a crucial one, because if the Seahawks can find a way to bounce back and Geno Smith's healthy, they get this win there in first place over the 49ers. If they lose, they're 2 full games out of first place, and maybe even potentially playing their way out of a wild card spot. They do have some cushion in the loss column right now, but there's no question this was a big game before today. It is now an even bigger game, a crucial game for the Seahawks at home on Thanksgiving night. They have to hope that Geno Smith is healthy. It doesn't sound promising with Ken Walker III that he's going to be available this quickly on Thursday night, but we'll have to wait and see. They had a couple guys on defense that got banged up. It's never easy to come back from injuries on these short weeks. We'll see what happens, but that is going to be the main attention focus here the next couple of days, is Geno Smith's health, Ken Walker III's health. Can the Seahawks get these guys back in time to play on Thursday night in what is a crucial game for them, not just in the NFC West standings, but in the playoff standings as well, after a loss in a game that they led all the way up till the final 2 minutes. To let it slip away the way they did, it's a disheartening, damaging loss, but they've got to find a way to move on with a really good 49ers team coming to town on Thursday night. Up next, I'm going to hand out my game balls on offense, defense, and special teams. Even though they lost, there were some standouts for the Seahawks in all 3 phases. Don't go away. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. When I was running a site for SI, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates. They made the process easy and seamless. All you have to do is create your job post and add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word you're hiring. And they have simple tools like screening questions that makes it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedInNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedInNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. It's your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week, whether you're listening up in Anchorage, Alaska, or down here in the land of the Rams in Inglewood, California. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Don't forget, tomorrow it is going to be a Misery Monday edition of Monday Musings, but Rob Rang and I will be diving into the tape, what we see on the All-22, some in-depth takeaways coming out of today's loss to the Rams at SoFi Stadium. Let's get to our game ball winners. And as is the case every week, even when you lose, there's going to be players that have standout performances. Only 16 points to show for it, but the Seahawks did receive a big performance from receiver DK Metcalf today. You look at the stat line, 5 receptions, 94 yards, also caught a touchdown, Seattle's opening touchdown, an 8-yard reception. It just seemed like Metcalf today came up in all of the big situations with clutch plays. He had that touchdown on the opening drive, and then a couple possessions later, Smith hits him with a 53-yard bomb down the left sideline. Those are the kind of plays we've been looking for DK Metcalf to make more of. The deep ball just has not been here this year, but Geno Smith came out throwing the ball, slinging it all over the field. It's unfortunate that he got hurt early in the third quarter because this was about as crisp as he's looked this year. He was firing the ball all over the place, looked very confident. The protection was holding up, and DK Metcalf was the recipient of several big pass plays. It's also worth noting that before Jason Myers had his 55-yard field goal that unfortunately went right and looked to me like it was a little bit short, even if it would have been accurate, might have been too short on that 55-yard field goal. But that was set up by a 21-yard catch on a post route by DK Metcalf. So again, he was coming through with big plays in clutch moments. This is the second straight week he's had at least 90 receiving yards. He looks healthier out there than he did, dealing with the hip issue that he had there for several weeks that cost him a game. He's moving really well. He's getting those big chunk plays. So that is a positive development out of today's game when it doesn't feel like there are very many of them, but DK Metcalf continues to put together a nice run. Several games here where he's been really productive. He's catching the football. He's making plays in the short, intermediate, and deep passing game. And he's also been making some contributions in the blocking game as usual. So I feel like he's playing some of his best football right now for the Seahawks. Even in defeat, had a really solid game on the outside for Seattle. On the defensive side of the football, even though the Seahawks had a pretty good game, they only gave up 17 points. There's a lot of things to be excited about. 2 for 9 on third down. It felt like everybody had a hand in the penalties. Everybody was involved in the meltdown late that allowed the Rams to win this game. So this was a little bit tougher for me to pick out one player that really stood out. But I think even when you consider some of the mistakes and one potential huge gaffe that he ended up getting away with, and that was Derail Henderson on a wheel route coming wide open. And I don't know whether Witherspoon was supposed to pick him up, but that could have been a touchdown, and Matthew Stafford threw it behind the running back on that wheel route. But you take that play out of the equation, the WWE tackle that he got penalized for, the other penalty in the end zone, which, again, I think that one was shaky at best. It looked like it was more of a flop by the receiver, Puka Nacua, than anything else. But Witherspoon made his mistakes, but he also had 8 tackles. He had a sack. He had a pass breakup in this game as well. That sack came on just the second play of the game. He continues to be an elite blitzer, coming from the slot, making game-changing plays for the Seahawks, was involved in a couple other really nice tackles coming up in space, the physicality that he brings to the equation. And he really, Cooper Kupp didn't play very long in this game before he was exiting with his own injury, but it felt like Witherspoon did a really good job most of this game of locking down the Rams' standout receivers. Puka Nacua was quiet most of the afternoon. There were a few plays that he got, but Trey Brown was on the other end of those. It felt like when Witherspoon was there that he was able to lock those guys down. And so in a game where everybody, again, felt like they had a piece of the pie in terms of giving up that late lead, Witherspoon had his own penalty issues. There were a few mishaps out there, but he also made some fantastic plays, stuffed the stat sheet. And so another really good overall outing for the top 5 pick as he makes a run for Defensive Rookie of the Year. And on special teams, let's give Michael Dickson some love. And he didn't punt until the third quarter. The Seahawks were moving the football well, and they got into Rams territory each of their first 3 drives and got points out of those. So Dickson didn't have to punt until the second half. And unfortunately, most of these came when Drew Lock was under center and Geno Smith had exited the game. But you want to talk about having some rockets come off of his foot today. 4 punts, 202 yards, 2 of those punts inside the 20. He was rocket man out there kicking the football, and one of the few bright spots. And Jason Myers, Myers could have been on this list even without his, or even with that missed field goal he had at the end of the game, because he made a 55-yarder in the first half, and he had room to spare. He might have been good from 65 yards on that kick, but can't put him here with that huge miss at the end of the game. Don't want to put everything on him. The Seahawks had other chances to win this football game. They could have handled that situation better, getting a little more yardage to help their kicker out too. But Michael Dickson had a really nice day on special teams, and he had 4 punts over 200 yards, 50-plus yard average. He was booming the football and helped set the Seahawks defense up with some really good starting field positions that helped neutralize the Rams and kept them at bay most of the afternoon. Okay, let's shift gears real quick now to our weekly 3 up, 3 down. And again, how this works here on Locked On Seahawks. We've got 3 up being 3 players that stood out from a positive standpoint, that had strong outings in Los Angeles, and 3 down players who didn't necessarily play as well as hoped or struggled. They're going to be looking to bounce back next week. And last week we did 3 up for both offense and defense because generally it was a pretty positive game coming out of Washington. This one, I was almost leaning towards just going all negative, but there were some standouts in this game. The Seahawks played well for 3+ quarters. They were in the lead for almost the entire game. So there were certainly some positive players. And when you start looking at 3 up, the players who stood out today, I want to give some love to number 7 under center. And for those who have been clamoring for Drew Lock to play, look, I'm not going to look at this game where he was thrust into action for an injured Geno Smith on the road. I'm not going to look at that as an example that he can't be a quality quarterback in the NFL or can't at least run Seattle's offense. But they had 2 back-to-back 3-and-outs. They had an interception on the next drive that was basically an arm punt. They were not able to do anything when Drew Lock was in the game. Geno Smith, beginning of the game, 3 straight scoring drives, had a touchdown pass, got hurt a little bit by some penalties on a few of those drives when they got into Rams territory, but still they were putting points on the board. And for him to come back after missing most of the second half with an elbow injury that, as he and Pete Carroll termed it, he just couldn't throw the football. He was able to get some of that discomfort to go away by the end of the game. He comes back in the last drive, completes a pass to Tyler Lockett for 13 yards, and then a 21-yard pass to DK Metcalf to put the Seahawks in range to potentially win this football game, doing that with a banged-up wing, his throwing wing, nonetheless, at quarterback. To me, that was pretty impressive. So Geno Smith, one of the offensive players that really stood out today, dealing with an injury. They have to hope that that's not something that's going to be bothering him the next few days, and hopefully he can play on Thursday night. But another really solid game. I think if he plays this entire game, that the Seahawks win it. But unfortunately, that is not how things played out. On the defensive side of the football for our 3-up, I've got Reek Woolen as my number 1 standout into the 3-up spectrum. And I know he had that critical penalty down the stretch that turned a 4th and 15 into a new set of downs. That was a play that, you could see him make contact, but it still felt like it was somewhat questionable at that time of the game. Nonetheless, he had his second interception. He picked off Matthew Stafford on a flea flicker. He also had a pass breakup, made a couple nice tackles in space. Were there some missed opportunities in the tackling game? Absolutely, but felt like this was a step in the right direction for him, and he's starting to play more like the young corner we saw last year that finished 3rd in Defensive Rookie of the Year balloting. I thought that he had a pretty solid game in the secondary for the Seahawks. And then up front, Jared Reed missed a few plays in this game. He's one of the guys that was on Pete Carroll's list that got a little banged up, but he came back in, finished the game, and he quietly had a very productive game. Only 3 tackles, but he had a pass breakup at the line of scrimmage, also had a quarterback hit. He was very active in this game. Also, the Rams had a tough time for most of this game. They averaged 3 yards per carry running the football. They had a tough time until the very end when they were able to get a little bit of push. Jaron Reed was very disruptive against the run as well. Number 90 has really been, I don't want to say revelation, because this is a guy that's been pretty good for most of his career, but coming off of last year in Green Bay, he really has played at a much higher level coming back to Seattle, and another really solid game for number 90, jumping out as a plus for the Seahawks. As far as the 3-down spectrum, I got to start with the interior offensive line for the Seahawks, and this is just based on my charting in-game, but 2 of the sacks that were on Geno Smith were because of missed blocks by the interior offensive line. They also allowed 3 quarterback hits, and one of those was the one that Aaron Donald was able to get. As Geno Smith said, I have to go back and watch the replay to see if this is really what played out, but he said that Aaron Donald's helmet hit him in the elbow area, and that's what caused him to leave the game. So that play in particular, Phil Haynes got blown up by Aaron Donald. There's really no shame in that. Aaron Donald's been doing that to guards and centers for his entire NFL career, the future first ballot Hall of Famer. But that was a huge play in this game, obviously, with Geno Smith getting hurt and missing most of the second half. And I felt like they couldn't get pushing the run game either. After starting somewhat promising, second half, every run play, the Rams were winning the line of scrimmage. So a little bit of a step back for the interior offensive line after playing pretty well last week against the Commanders. And on the defensive side of the football, Bobby Wagner, let's give him a little bit of positives here first. Bobby Wagner with 10 tackles, over 100 tackles for the 12th consecutive season, and only 2 other players have done that. at the linebacker position. So certainly an incredible accomplishment for him. But he also had two glaring mistakes in coverage that Matthew Stafford was able to take advantage of. And one of them being in the fourth quarter, Puka Nacua was behind him, and Bobby Wagner was actually in a position to potentially make a play in coverage against him, but he never turned to make a play on the football. So Stafford got it into Nacua for a 30-plus yard reception that set up points for the Rams. So Bobby Wagner, I'm not going to sit here and make the argument that he has been an issue for the Seahawks in coverage. I feel like he's had a very sound season, but he gave up two 20-plus yard receptions today in coverage. He got put in a bad spot against Tutu Atwell. Very few linebackers are going to win that from an athleticism standpoint, but this was not one of his better games this year in coverage, and those plays ended up being big on scoring drives for the Rams. Both of those drives resulting in points for the home team in this victory. And last, I have to keep pointing out Draymond Jones because the stat line, and again, I could go back and watch the film and maybe feel a little bit differently, but he had one tackle. I remember one pressure on Matthew Stafford, and he was able to spin away from him, didn't even get contact on him. No quarterback hits, no sacks. It was another really quiet game for number 55, and didn't even notice him standing out in the run game. It was more the guys that were playing in the interior. They were using him some off the edge as they did last week as a stand-up defender, and it just was another really quiet game for a player that you invested all the money the Seahawks did. And I thought last week was a step in the right direction for him. He was very quiet in this football game. They need more impact plays from number 55, regardless of whether he's playing inside, if he's in a two-point stance off the edge. They need him to pick up his game. He's just got to play at a higher level. And right now, that is really hurting the Seahawks' chances on defense of being able to get after the quarterback. They still only had 3 quarterback hits in this game, even though Devin Witherspoon had a sack, 2 plays into action. They consistently were not able to get to Matthew Stafford. They had more pressures in this game than they did in week 1, but they weren't able to finish, and Draymond Jones was part of that. So this, again, goes back to expectations. When you pay a guy as much as they did, he has got to be more of an impact player, more of a factor, and he gets a chance Thursday night to do that against San Francisco. He has a big game against the 49ers, then that's certainly going to be a feather in his cap. But to this point, there's been too many games like this where it hasn't just been the stats. When you're watching the game, you just don't see the impact plays. Even the stuff that shows up, that doesn't show up in the box score, but shows up on film, you're just not seeing enough of those splashy plays, and you need that to win these divisional matchups that are always so tough between familiar foes. As always, now you guys can follow me on Threads. That's primarily where I'm going to be reporting from at this point, at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to ensure that you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, Rob Rang will be rejoining the show. The two of us will be diving into our Monday musings, our in-depth takeaways for the Seahawks coming out of this loss to the Rams at SoFi Stadium. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.